The storm had ended, but the air on Nerith still carried the heavy bite of frost. Vera stood at the edge of the crater, her pale wings folded close to keep out the cold wind. Beside her, the other 3 Ishar watched the strange creature that had climbed from the broken ship. The human moved carefully, each step slow as if testing the snow's strength. Its breath steamed inside the helmet, fogging the glass. It carried a small pack slung over one shoulder, and every few moments it looked at a device in its gloved hands. The Ishar had never seen such tools. The younger dragon, Terran, tilted his head. It is small. How could something so small survive the sky's fall? He asked through the deep tone of the Ishar's telepathic voice. Small things can still endure. Vera answered calmly. Her gaze did not leave the human. The ice does not care how large or strong one is. What matters is the will to keep moving. The human stopped. Seeing that the dragons made no move toward him, it slowly knelt, drawing something from the pack. A small box of blinking lights. Placing it on the snow, the human tapped the panel, and a faint, warm glow rose from it. The air above the box shimmered slightly, like heat over stone. The Ishar stepped back, surprised. Warmth was rare here, and to see it come from such a small thing was almost like a dream. The human pointed to the glowing box, then at the dragons, as if to say, "You can come closer." Vera approached, her great shadow falling over the human. The warmth touched her scales, and she almost forgot the sting of the wind for a moment. It was not strong, but it was real. The human's eyes softened as he saw her reaction. He removed one glove and placed his bare hand near the glow, then gestured toward Vera to do the same. She lowered her long neck, letting the heat brush her snout. The human gave a short sound, a laugh, though the Ishar did not know the word. The youngest Ishar there, Wreath, leaned toward Terran. It makes heat, if it can make heat. Could it bring back the warmth our elders speak of? Terran snorted softly. Do not fill your wings with dreams. This one is alone. It cannot fight the cold of a whole world. Vera stayed silent, but a small part of her wondered the same. The human finally tapped the front of the helmet, then slowly removed it. The Ishar saw a face, pale from the cold, with short dark hair sticking to the skin. The eyes were brown, sharp but not unkind. When the wind struck his cheeks, the human's lips tightened in discomfort. Yet he did not put the helmet back on immediately. He pointed to himself and spoke one word. Ryan. The sound was strange to the Ishar, but Vera repeated it slowly in her deep tone. Ryan. The human's eyes widened. It was clear he could feel the voice in his mind, even if he did not understand how. Vera pointed to herself and sent her name into his thoughts. His brows drew together in surprise, but he tried to repeat it out loud. It came out as Ve-Ra. It was close enough. The ice cracked softly underfoot as Ryan took a few steps toward the broken ship. He looked over the twisted metal, shaking his head. From a pocket, he pulled a tool, a small silver rod with lights. He tapped it against part of the ship's frame, and it beeped in response. Vera watched closely. She did not know the purpose of these actions, but she recognized the focus in his movements. It was the focus of one who repairs, one who tries to make broken things whole again. Hours passed in the pale daylight. Ryan worked around the ship, sometimes muttering to himself. The Ishar stayed near, their bodies shielding him from the wind. It was strange. They had never done such a thing for another being before. When the sun dipped lower, the cold deepened. Ryan stopped his work and looked toward the distant cliffs where the Ishar caves lay. He spoke a few words and pointed to himself, then toward the caves. It was clear enough. He wanted shelter. Vera gave a slow nod. She turned, leading the way across the frozen plain. The other Ishar formed a loose circle around Ryan as they walked, their great wings folding against the wind to shield him. The journey took hours, the snow crunching under heavy claws and human boots. By the time they reached the caves, the sky had turned a deep violet gray. Inside, the air was still cold but calm, and the glow of small moss fires lit the walls with soft green light. The other Ishar in the caves stirred at the sight of the human. Whispers filled the air. What is it? Where did it come from? Why is it here? Vera raised her head and silenced them with a low rumble. It fell from the sky. It seeks no harm. For now, it is under my watch. Ryan set down his pack and pulled out the small glowing box again. He placed it in the center of the gathering space. The warmth it gave was little, but the Ishar felt it. They moved closer, their breath forming clouds in the dim light. For the first time in many long seasons, there was something new in the caves, a small heat, a small hope. Ryan sat down, pulling out a piece of thin metal and a tool, his hands moving with care. The Ishar watched him, silent but curious. They did not yet know what he could do for them. They did not yet know if he would stay. But Vera, watching the faint glow from the box, felt something stir in her heart. Perhaps this was not only a visitor. Perhaps this was the start of the change they had stopped believing in. Outside, the wind rose again, but inside the caves, there was warmth enough to forget it, at least for a while. The days after Ryan's arrival passed slowly, but not without change. The Ishar were still cautious, but they no longer kept their distance. Some even began leaving small offerings near where he slept, a strip of dried moss, a polished ice stone, a shard of clear crystal. It was their quiet way of saying they accepted him in their home. At least for now. Ryan, in return, tried to learn more about them. At first, words were useless. They did not speak in the way humans did. Their voices were soundless, yet still entered his mind, deep, calm, and full of images instead of sentences. At times it was overwhelming, like being shown 100 pictures at once, but he slowly began to understand their meaning. Vera became his guide. She would show him the frozen plains, the sharp cliffs, and the deep ice valleys. Her movements were patient, and she often stopped so he could take notes on the small device he carried. He never told her. But the truth was, his repairs on the ship were going slowly. The cold made metal brittle and tools stiff, and without proper parts, his work felt like trying to patch a hole in a glass with snow. One evening, while the pale sun hung low in the sky, Vera led Ryan farther than usual. They climbed a ridge where the wind was strong, but the view stretched far across the frozen land. In the distance, Ryan saw something strange, tall shapes rising from the ice like broken teeth. The towers stood in a wide circle, their once smooth, sides cracked and leaning. Some were half buried under snow. They did not look natural. Ryan's eyes narrowed. They were made of metal and glass. Though time and frost had scarred them deeply, Vera stopped at the ridge, her wings folding close. Her voice reached his mind. These are the old spires. They gave warmth when the sun's light grew weak. Without them, Nerith froze. Ryan stared. He stepped down into the valley, crunching through snow until he reached the nearest spire. Up close, the damage was clearer. Massive fractures ran along its length, and great panels had fallen away. But beneath the frost, he could still see the remains of power lines, circuit frames, and something that looked very much like a heat core. His hands touched the cold metal. It was the same kind of technology he had worked with before, though much older. This was not magic. It was a machine. He turned back to Vera, excitement in his voice. This is not gone. It can be fixed. The Ishar leader tilted her head, her pale eyes calm but doubtful. Many seasons ago, we tried. We do not have the skill to mend them. We only know how to survive without them. Ryan shook his head, snow falling from his hair. No, you don't understand. I'm a mechanic. Fixing machines is what I do. I could bring one of these back. The other dragons who had followed them exchanged silent thoughts. Some felt a flicker of hope, but others were wary. What if he failed? Hope was dangerous here. It could make the cold feel even sharper when it returned. Ryan ignored their doubt and began examining the spire's base. The design was alien, but logical. The core collected energy from the weak sun, storing it and releasing it as heat. The problem was that the storage chamber was shattered, and most of the wiring had frozen beyond use. Still, it was possible. Hard, but possible. As they returned to the caves, Ryan's mind was alive with plans. He began sketching designs in the snow, showing Vera how the core could be rebuilt. She listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. That night, the The dragons gathered to hear what the human had found. The great chamber echoed with the deep hum of their voices and thought. Ryan stood near the center, using hand gestures and drawings on the ice to explain. If I could rebuild one spire, he said slowly, it could melt the ice nearby. You could grow food again. You wouldn't have to fight the cold every day. The dragons listened. Vera's voice rose above the others. This will not be easy. The storms will fight you. The ice will fight you. If you begin this, you must finish it, or you will waste your last strength. Ryan met her gaze. I've worked in worse places. I've fixed ships in space with nothing but scrap and hope. This is just bigger. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then Vera lowered her head slightly, a gesture of agreement. Then you will try, and we will watch. The next day, Ryan began. He returned to the spire with a small team of dragons, Terran, Wreath, and an older male named Morik. The dragons carried heavy broken panels back to the caves. While Ryan carefully removed parts that could be reused, the cold bit at his fingers, even through gloves, and his breath turned to frost inside his helmet. By the end of the first day, they had gathered a pile of usable pieces. Ryan studied them by the glow of the moss fires. The work ahead would take days, maybe weeks, but for the first time since his crash, he felt like he had a purpose here. The Ishar still did not fully believe in his plan, but in their eyes, there was something new. Curiosity. It was the first crack in the wall of quiet acceptance they had built around themselves for generations. And for Ryan, it was the first step toward changing the fate of an entire world. The morning on Nerith came quietly. The pale sun rose weakly over the endless white, casting a silver glow across the plains. The cold was sharp enough to make metal groan. Ryan stood outside the Ishar caves, pulling his thick gloves tighter. Behind him, Vera and 3 other dragons watched silently. Today would be the first day of true work on the broken spire. The journey to the spire took hours. The wind bit at Ryan's face, and his boots crunched over hard snow. The dragons moved more easily, their claws gripping the ice, their heavy bodies steady against the gusts. Every now and then, Ryan saw one of them glance at him, as if checking if the small human could really handle this place. When they reached the spire, Ryan knelt by the base. The cracks in the metal were deep, and frost clung to every edge. He pressed his hand against the cold surface and looked up at the towering shape. It was broken, yes, but it was not hopeless. From his pack, Ryan pulled a set of tools, some from his ship, some given by the Ishar from their old storage caves. He began scraping away thick layers of ice, revealing the spire's true surface. The work was slow, his breath heavy inside his helmet. The dragons did not stand idle. Vera used the heat of her breath to melt the larger ice sheets, while Terran lifted broken panels and set them aside. Wreath carried pieces back toward the caves to be clean and prepared. Even Morik, who had doubted Ryan the most, lent his strength to move large beams buried under snow. By midday, they had uncovered the spire's core housing. It was a wide chamber inside the base. Sealed shut by frozen bolts, Ryan studied it, then tapped the metal with his wrench. It gave a dull, heavy sound, still strong. If I can open this, Ryan told Vera, I can see the inside. That's where the real repairs start. She nodded, lowering her head to examine the place. These walls have not been opened since before I was born. It took hours to unseal the chamber. When the door finally gave way with a loud creak, a puff of frozen air spilled out. Inside was a network of wires, crystal conduits, and machinery, all coated in frost. Some parts were shattered, others were still intact but lifeless. Ryan's eyes lit up. This is it, the heart of the spire. He climbed inside, his small form disappearing into the tangle of ancient technology. The dragon stayed outside, listening to the clinks and scrapes of his tools. The work was not easy. The cold made metal brittle, and every movement of his fingers was slowed by the heavy gloves. Ryan kept a small heating unit strapped to his chest, but even so, he had to pause often to warm his hands. By evening, he had mapped out the broken connections and damaged circuits. He emerged from the chamber, covered in frost dust, his cheeks red from the cold. He pointed to a diagram he had drawn on a metal sheet. These are the parts we need. Some we can salvage from the other spires. Others, I'll have to build from scrap. Vera studied the drawing, her eyes narrowing slightly. And how long will this take? Ryan shrugged. Days? Weeks? Maybe. I'm only one person. But if I have help, it will be faster. The dragons exchanged silent thoughts. Finally, Vera looked at him. Then you will have help. The Ishar will work with you. The next morning, the true building began. Ryan gave each dragon a simple task, melting ice from certain panels, lifting heavy frames, carrying parts to and from the caves. At first, they moved slowly, uncertain about his strange instructions. But as the days passed, they began to understand his ways. Ryan's hands worked constantly. He repaired a shattered heat crystal by fusing smaller shards together with the heat from a portable torch. He built replacement wires from thin strands of metal scavenged from his ships. Broken walls. He used melted ice water to clean parts before sealing them in new casings. The storms, however, were always ready to test him. One afternoon, a sudden blizzard swept in, burying the tools under snow. In minutes, the wind howled so loudly that even the Ishar had to shield their heads with their wings. Ryan fought to cover the open chamber before the snow filled it. Terran roared through the storm. Calling to the others, they formed a circle around Ryan and the spire, using their massive bodies to block the worst of the wind until the blizzard passed. When the sky finally cleared, Ryan looked at them with quiet gratitude. Thanks. Without you, we'd be digging this out until next week. Even Mork gave a small rumble of approval. Each day ended with the group returning to the caves, their breath heavy but their spirits a little warmer. The Ishar began to gather near Ryan's workspace. In the evenings, watching him shape strange tools or melt metal into new forms. Some asked silent questions, and he answered with simple drawings in the snow. Vera often stayed the longest, her pale eyes following every step of his work. She still did not fully believe the spire would wake again, but she was starting to believe in the humans' determination. One night, as the pale light of the moon reflected on the ice walls, Ryan sat alone in the work chamber, tightening a set of bolts. He could hear the low breathing of the sleeping Ishar deeper in the cave. His hands ached, but his mind was sharp. This can work, he whispered to himself. I can do this. He thought of the warmth that could spread from the spire, melting the ice in wide circles. He imagined the dragons flying under skies where the air did not bite at their wings. It was possible. It had to be possible. Outside, the wind rose again, carrying fine snow across the plains. The frozen world waited, as it had for centuries. But now, for the first time, someone was working to change it. The pale sun had not risen high before the wind began to hiss across the plains. It was the sound Ryan had learned to fear, the warning that another storm was coming. He stood at the base of the spire, tightening the last bolts on a support frame, when he felt the air change. The cold grew sharper, the light dimmed, and the far horizon blurred into moving white. Vera landed beside him, her wings folding close. The sky speaks of a great storm. Her voice rumbled in his mind. If we do not cover the work, the snow will bury it. Ryan nodded quickly. Then let's cover it fast. The Ishar moved into action without hesitation. Terran and Mork lifted large panels, sliding them over the open chamber of the spire. Reith fetched ropes of woven moss fiber from the caves, tossing them to Ryan so he could tie the panels down. The wind grew stronger with every passing minute. By the time the storm reached them, they had secured most of the work. Snow began to whip sideways, stinging Ryan's face through his mask. The dragons formed a shield around him, but the icy air still found its way through every gap in his clothing. Hours passed in a blur of white and sound. When the wind finally began to weaken, the ground was already buried in deep snow. Ryan looked at the spire. Most of it was safe, but the ropes holding one of the panels had snapped. Snow had poured into the gap. With tired hands, he began clearing it out, but the snow had already frozen solid. Vera stepped forward, lowering her head. A slow stream of warm breath melted the ice enough for Ryan to pull it free. Thanks, he said through the mask. She simply gave a short nod. Over the next days, the work continued. The storm had delayed them, but it had also done something unexpected. It had made the Ishar work with Ryan more closely than before. They no longer waited for his instructions with uncertainty. They anticipated what he needed. When he needed heavy metal beams moved, Mork was already there, gripping them in his strong claws. When the tools froze in the cold, Reith brought heated stones from the caves to warm them. Terrence scoured the nearby spires for parts, returning with broken panels that could still be repaired. The teamwork was unlike anything the Ishar had done for generations. For so long, they had only thought of survival, one hunt at a time, one storm at a time. Now they were building something together. One evening, Ryan worked on the spire's core, welding a fractured heat conduit back into place. The glow of his torch reflected on the ice walls, making the shadows dance. Beside him, Vera crouched low, watching the process with deep focus. "Why do you work so hard for a world that is not yours?" she finally asked. Ryan paused, letting the torch flame die. He looked up at her pale eyes. "Because I can't stand seeing something broken and just walking away. If I can fix this, I will. It doesn't matter whose world it is." Vera's gaze lingered on him for a long moment before she said quietly, "You are not like the stories we were told of those who travel the stars." Ryan smiled faintly and returned to his work. Days turned into weeks, piece by piece. The spire's systems began to look whole again. The outer frame stood straight. The crystal collectors were repaired, and the wiring hummed faintly when tested. All that remained was to power the core. That was the hardest part. The Ishar had no working power cells, and Ryan's ship had only a few left, most already damaged. The one remaining fusion cell was meant for his own ship. Without it, he could never leave Nerith. He sat alone in the cave one night, turning the small power cell in his hands. Its surface was scratched from years of use, but it still held enough energy to jumpstart the spire. If he used it here, he would be trapped until another ship found him. If he didn't use it, all their work might be for nothing. The quiet sound of claws on stone made him look up. Vera was there, her head lowered to fit through the narrow tunnel. "You have the look of one carrying a heavy choice," she said softly. Ryan sighed. "I have a way to power the spire, but it's all I have for my own ship. If I use it here, I can't leave. If I keep it for myself, your people stay in the cold." Vera was silent for a long time. Then she said, "We have lived with the cold for centuries. We will continue if we must. But you must choose the path you can live with when you close your eyes at night." Ryan turned the cell over once more, his thoughts heavy. The next morning, he made his decision. The dragons gathered round the spire, the pale light of dawn glinting off their white scales. Ryan climbed up the side of the structure, the fusion cell secured in his pack. "This is it," he called down, his voice carrying through the still air. "Either it works or it doesn't." He knelt at the core housing and carefully locked the cell into place. The connectors clicked, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, a faint hum began deep inside the spire. The dragons leaned closer. A pulse of soft golden light spread upward through the crystal collectors. The snow round the base began to melt, steam rising into the cold air. The Ishar stared in silence, for the first time in generations. They felt true warmth on their scales. It was weak still, but it was real. Ryan climbed down, pulling off his gloves to feel the heat himself. It was not enough to save the whole world. Not yet, but it was proof that it could be done. Mork rumbled in wonder. "The cold does not win." Today, Vera's gaze met Ryan's. "No," she said softly, "it does not." The spire was alive again, and with it, so was hope. The night on Nerith was deeper and colder than any Ryan had known before. The stars above were sharp points in the dark sky, but the cold pressed down like a heavy blanket. Inside the cave, the Ishar rested, their pale forms curled for warmth. But Ryan's mind raced. He held the small fusion cell tightly in his hands. This cell was the last power source he had from his ship. Without it, he could never leave Nerith. But without it, the spire's heat core could not fully come alive outside. The wind howled, shaking the cave's entrance. The snow pressed close like a white wall. Time was running out. Ryan stood up quietly and moved toward the spire. The dragon stirred but did not wake. They trusted him now. The spire's core chamber was cold and silent. He knelt before it, breathing slowly to keep steady. He had done everything he could, repaired the wires, replaced the shattered crystal, and cleaned the frost away. Now, it was time for the final step. He connected the fusion cell to the power input. For a moment, nothing happened. The silence was thick and heavy. Then, a low hum began deep inside the spire. It grew stronger and stronger, filling the chamber with soft vibrations. The crystal collectors caught the faint light from the distant sun and began to glow. A warm golden light spread slowly through the frozen core. Ice around the spire's base began to melt, sending steam curling into the cold air. The wind outside softened, and the storm clouds began to break. Ryan stepped back, watching the light grow. It was not bright yet, but it was enough to bring life back to Nerith. The Ishar dragons awoke and came to the cave entrance. Their eyes were wide with wonder as they felt the warmth growing on their scales. Vera stepped forward, her wings open to the soft light. For centuries, she said, we believed the cold was our fate. But now, the first light returns. The dragons spread their wings, feeling the heat on their skin for the first time in many lifetimes. A few of the younger ones began to flap carefully, testing the air that no longer bit sharply. Ryan smiled, exhausted but proud. He knew this was only the beginning. Days passed. The warm circle around the spire slowly grew. Moss began to push. Through cracks in the ice, small animals, once hidden beneath the frozen ground, returned to the light. Ryan taught the Ishar how to use the tools he had brought. He showed them how to keep the spire running and how to repair small breaks. The dragons learned quickly, their strong claws and sharp minds well suited to the task. Vera watched the young dragons practice flying in the warmer air. She knew that the future of their kind was no longer locked in ice. They had been given a chance to thrive again. But not all was easy. Ryan's ship was still broken. The fusion cell that powered the spire was now empty, and he had no way to call for help. He wondered if anyone would come for him, or if Nerith would become his home forever. One night, under the bright stars, Vera came to him. You have done more than any Ishar could, she said softly. This world owes you its life. Ryan looked at her and smiled sadly. I only did what I had to do. But in his heart, he knew that this frozen world had changed him too. Together, they had begun to turn the long night into dawn. The ice on Nerith began to melt slowly but surely, where once there had been only endless white. Patches of dark stone and green moss started to show. The air grew softer, carrying the scent of fresh water and growing plants. The Ishar dragons moved with new strength. Their wings no longer felt the sharp bite of the cold wind. They soared higher and longer than they had in many generations. Ryan watched from the caves, his heart full. He had come as a stranger, lost and broken, but now he was part of this frozen world's rebirth. The repaired spire stood tall on the ice plain, glowing softly with life-giving warmth. Ryan had spent many days helping the Ishar rebuild others, using parts found in the frozen valleys and the skills he had taught them. Together, they had begun to restore the planet's heat. Yet, despite the new hope, a question weighed on Ryan's mind. Could he ever leave this place? His ship was still broken. The cold had crushed many parts beyond repair. Without help, he was trapped out one evening. Vera came to him as the sun dipped low behind distant cliffs. You have given us warmth and life, she said. But what will you do now? Ryan looked at the fading light. I don't know, he admitted. My home is far away, but so is rescue. Nerith has become part of me. Vera nodded slowly. This world was dying. You gave it new breath. You are a guardian now, as much as we are. The dragons gathered nearby, their pale scales shining in the soft glow of the spire. They had learned from Ryan and grown stronger. Together, they would protect the new life spreading across Nerith. Days later, a strange sound came across the sky. Ryan looked up to see a small ship approaching, its engines bright against the blue horizon. Hope filled his chest. He had sent a faint signal weeks before using the repaired spire's energy. Someone had heard. The ship landed on the ice plain, and Ryan prepared to leave. But before he could go, Vera stepped forward. "Will you leave us now?" she asked softly. Ryan looked at the dragons, at the growing force, at the warm light spreading across the land. He smiled. "No," he said firmly, "this is where I belong." The human mechanic had saved the albino dragons and their frozen world. In return, he had found a new home, and Nerith's long night had finally ended. For many years, he had walked through the empty streets of Orcs, a planet once filled with the voices and smells of humans. The air was cold now, the buildings broken and silent. Rusty's paws patted over cracked stone, his ears twitching. At every echo, once, long ago, Rusty had belonged to a family. He remembered warm hands, gentle voices, and food that came every day. But when the humans left Orcs, they had gone in big silver ships. Rusty had waited at the place where the ship had stood. He waited one day, then two, then more. But no, one came back. Now, the only sound was the wind, and sometimes the far-off call of strange creatures that had taken over the ruins. Rusty was not young anymore. His fur was patchy, and his legs were slower than before. But he was strong enough to survive. He found water in puddles and hunted small animals that lived in the cracks of the city. Sometimes, he chewed dry roots when food was hard to find. That night, as the sky turned dark blue, Rusty sat under a broken tower. The air smelled strange. He lifted his head and sniffed. There was a sharp, metallic scent mixed with the clean smell of rain. He heard a low hum in the distance dot above him. 3 glowing shapes moved slowly across the sky. They were not like human ships. They were longer, with curves that looked alive. Rusty's tail went stiff. He did not know what these were, but his heart told him to stay out of sight. He slipped into a shadow and watched them until they vanished behind the clouds. When the humming faded, Rusty began to move again. He was searching for water. His nose led him down a side street where rain often collected in deep holes in the road. As he drank, he heard something faint, a sound almost too soft for human ears, but not for his. It was a small, high-pitched cry. Rusty lifted his head and listened. The sound came again, a weak whimper, followed by a light scraping noise. His ears pricked forward, and he started to follow it. His paws made almost no sound as he moved through the shadows. The sound grew clearer. It was coming from an old building with a hole in its side. The walls were blackened, and the roof had fallen in long ago. Rusty paused at the edge of the hole and sniffed the air. There was no smell of danger, but there was a scent he had never met before, warm, sweet, and faintly sharp, like the smell of rain on metal dot inside. The air was still. Rusty stepped carefully over the rubble. In the center of the broken room, he saw something strange. A pile of soft, tangled fibers that looked like a nest. In the middle of the nest were 3 large, smooth shells. Each shell glowed faintly. From within, as if holding a tiny light, Rusty froze. He had never seen anything like this. Then, one of the shells moved. A small crack appeared, and from inside came a tiny sound. The same soft cry Rusty had heard. The crack widened, and a small head pushed through. The head was covered in smooth, shiny scales. Not fur. The bright eyes blinked up at him. The other 2 shells began to shake as well. Cracks formed, and more small heads appeared. Each creature was no bigger than Rusty's head. Their bodies were thin, with tiny wings folded against their sides. Their tails were long and curled. Rusty tilted his head, sniffing them. They smelled like the strange sky ships, but softer, gentler. The little creatures made tiny chirps and shuffled weakly in the nest. One of them tried to stand but fell over, its wings flapping helplessly. Something inside Rusty stirred. A deep memory woke in him. The same feeling he had once known when the small human child in his old family had cried. It was the feeling of needing to protect, to keep safe. The creatures shivered. The room was cold. Without thinking, Rusty stepped into the nest and curled his body around them. His warm fur pressed against their small forms. They made soft, contented sounds and huddled closer to him. Night fell fully outside. Rusty kept watch, his ears turning at every sound. Far away, he heard a low thrum, the alien ships again. Moving through the air, a faint blue light passed over the broken walls, scanning. Rusty pressed himself lower, keeping the little ones hidden under his body. The light passed, and the hum moved away. Rusty stayed still for a long time before he relaxed again. The smallest creature gave a tiny sneeze. Another yawned and curled its tail around Rusty's paw. Rusty's heart felt warm in a way it had not in many years. For the first time since the humans left, he did not feel completely alone. Outside, the night was deep and cold. But in the ruined building, under the broken roof, an old dog and 3 newborn alien dragons slept together. A small, unexpected family at the edge of the galaxy.